Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another Friday Ramblings as we continue to count down to our Halloween spectacular because it is the greatest holiday of the year and therefore it is worth counting down. We're discussing all things spooky, supernatural, and just plain fun. And yes, folks, I did promise you last episode, and I'm going to hype it up again. The end of our countdown is going to be something extra special. I'm going to do something brand new. It's going to be a completely different thing. I'm going to make you wait one more week before I announce it. But I am going to say you are going to love it. And it'll be a special Halloween edition. I know Halloween's on Thursday. But we're going to do our episode that week a day early because that's how much the holiday means to me. I'm flipping the script. But speaking of scripts, there are a lot of movies. Big old stack of movies. Like yay-hi, yay-hi. Based off two different novels. Between the two of them, they have accumulated a huge level of movies, TV shows, comic books, everything. Video games, everything fiction. These two characters have been adapted for it. Over and over and over and over again. And, appropriately enough, they are spooky themed. Yes, folks, we talked about Edgar Allan Poe, so now we're going to talk about the other godfathers of horror and suspense and thrills and chills. Dracula and Frankenstein. Because really, how was I going to sit there and discuss such a countdown without touching on these two? And yes, I own copies of the original novels, which is why I can talk about these with confidence. And we are going to focus on the novels. We're not going to focus on the many, many adaptations. That's just the way it is. Universal Studios, Hammer Horror, they did some great classic stuff with them. Modern times, a lot of other people have done great stuff with it. But we're talking about what Bram Stoker wrote and what Mary Shelley wrote. Now we're going to go first with Bram Stoker Dracula. Doesn't matter how you want to shake it, whether it's by title or by author. Hey, D comes before F, B comes before M. Unless you want to do it by last names, then SH comes before ST. But hey, 2 out of 3 means we're starting with Dracula, baby. King of the Vampires. Nosferatu. Vrolok. Strago. Demon. Now, the idea of a vampire predated Bram Stoker. When you get down to regional names, the simple fact of the matter is that the vampire is one of the oldest supernatural critter myths there is in European culture. Basically, almost as soon as European civilization came out, the idea of a humanoid who comes out from the ground, where it's supposed to be buried and dead, preying on humans, and occasionally some other animals, has existed. Bram Stoker was familiar with those legends, so he mixed those classic superstitions and myths that have been in oral tradition for centuries, along with the reputation of Vlad Tepes III, a Eastern European noble who had no qualms about doing very sadistic things to intimidate the other larger nations from trying to annex his little country of Wallachia. what would later become to be known as Transylvania. He combined these two concepts to come up with the idea of Dracula. Now, Dracula means son of the dragon, because Vlad Tepes, the real man, was part of an order of knights with draconic themes in the name. I don't remember the exact perfect translation, but essentially the Order of the Dragons. So as a member of this order, and he later came to be known as the Son of the Dragons, or, in the local language, Dracula. That's where we get the title from. Now, as far as the story in and of itself, the basic gist of the story is that Lord Dracula has been reigning supreme in his little corner of Transylvania for a long time. And he is now ready to spread across Europe. Specifically, he wants to start in England, because at that time England was a densely populated place that was also financially and, travel-wise connected to pretty much everywhere in Europe. Thus, it was one of a handful of cities that were perfectly primed as your place to launch a new invasion. So, thinking like a nobleman, and yes, this, by the way, folks, is a used copy, because it is kind of hard to track down a recent print. But, you do what you can when working with classic literature. This is pretty thick. There is some supplemental stuff around it. The actual story is not technically that thick. But, as I said, thinking like a noble, he starts with finances and setting up cover identities. So, by contacting a agency that specializes in banking and real estate type matters, he has them send one of their agents to Dracula, where he arranges to legally purchase land in England so that he can start establishing a cover identity of a visiting noble who has decided in his old age to journey to England, as he has heard many stories of it and is quite fascinated by the city. Wonderful cover identity, because he's already kissing butt to the English culture, and he's doing things legally. He is allowed in the country. He has been invited to the country, because that plays back into the vampiric superstitions. However, there's certain things he's got to do. He's got to learn the local language fluently. He's got to make sure his new property and new home is set up the way he needs it to be set up before he moves in. And specifically, he's got to transport himself there along with some of his native soil. That is an important plot point in the series, is the weaknesses of the vampire. Among them is that he has to sleep not just in soil, but soil of his homeland. This is exploited later on when he is finally revealed for what he is, thanks to the work of scientist, doctor, teacher, and studier of old superstitions, Abraham von Helsing. We don't have a pretty picture of, we just have a pretty picture of Dracula. But yes, long story short, Dracula makes the mistake that he really couldn't have perceived coming, and that is one of his first victims is a lovely young lass who has a suitor, not the one she finally commits to, but one of her 3 suitors is a former student who stayed in good standing and friendship with Professor Abraham von Helsing. Thus, when her victimization starts taking her health and she inches closer to undeath, this doctor calls upon his former professor, who he remembers knows a lot more about, at the time he considered an obscure blood disease, but which Van Helsing quickly recognized as vampirism at work. Now, from there, we have confrontations, we have showing off of power, we have more victims, we have a chase back across Europe, ending it in Transylvania. We have assorted heroes banding together, united by their desire to avenge fallen friends and lover, and to protect those still alive that Dracula has begun to victimize. So what made this story so iconic? What made it something that every culture around the world... Ooh, creaky door. It'd be spooky if I didn't know I had a pet cat who likes to play with closet doors. Whoa. But yes, what makes this a story that every country in the world can latch behind? Well, it's very simple, because Dracula represents so many levels of primal fears with us. The dignified, cultured, financially well-off, noble man who sweeps in, can be charming and say all the right words to psychologically seduce you into trusting him, to the point that even when strange things are happening all around him, coincidentally, right after he makes it into the country, nobody wants to suspect him. There's also the fear of the supernatural that we have touched on, that fear of the unknown and uncontrollable, mixed with the primal savagery of the vampire. And the vampire makes itself seen, and the vampire makes itself known. What does it do? It attacks its victims. It rips the throat out. It has claws and fangs. It is basically a wild creature. And all those elements are perfectly blended together by Bram Stoker to create a villain that is eternal. It is unknown. It is our cultured ideal of what a man should be. It is savage and brutal when need be. And that is what makes a great antagonist. That is what makes an eternally interesting antagonist. When it works on so many levels. So no matter what the reader fears in their deep subconscious, Dracula touches on an aspect of that. Now, we also have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now this I did buy new, because I was able to grab a copy for a good price. Now, like the original, there is introductions and backstory. So the story itself is not quite that thick, but close. Neither one of these stories are, by modern fiction novel standards, I guess fictional novels redundant, but by modern fiction standards, neither one of these are long stories. Now, Frankenstein is the story of romance and a love of things that are not a good woman, like science. Frankenstein, sometimes known as the modern Prometheus. Victor von Frankenstein is a story of what happens when we try to extend our knowledge faster than our moral compass. When we try to prove that we can do anything God can do, we can create life. More than that, we can return life to that which previously had it. We can make it better. The Frankenstein's creature, because that is how it was referred in the original book, not a monster, but the creature of Dr. Frankenstein. The creature is stronger, smarter, faster than a regular human. It is beyond human. And that is where the real fear of things comes in. Not just that we do not have the inherent wisdom and omniscience of God. So when we try to play God and bring life to that which should no longer have life, that we create something horrifying, but that what we created was inherently designed to be our superior. You know, late in the story, when the creature demands a bride, one of Victor's fears is that even if they go to what is then isolation, which the creature promised, what happens if they breed? If this experiment becomes a species that cannot be stopped as easily as a regular human, the children and the children's children and the children's children's children may not want to stay in isolation, away from humanity. And once they encounter humanity, well, who's going to win? But more than that, Frankenstein at its core is a very psychological story, because it deals with young Victor's, not just his mistakes and feeling that he could push his knowledge faster than anybody ever can in a field nobody had ever taken serious study to, but about how the consequences of what he created mess with his mind. We had spoken this earlier in discussing Eternal Darkness and Cthulhu mythology, how it's all about breaking down your psychology. Well, Frankenstein is about the breakdown of Victor's psychology, a man who had it all. He was from a wealthy family. He had gone to a great college. He had the love of a good woman. He was ready to get married. But when he ran his experiment, and that experiment brought to life something that was never meant to be, and that by its very existence was a threat to any human around it, Victor's reaction, his breakdown, his attempted recovery, and then when the creature returns to him, still alive, and demanding Victor make right for what he did wrong. Desperation. Realizing there is nothing left for the creature or the professor but destruction to end the threat and the curse that Victor brought to life with these own hands. That is what Frankenstein is all about. Not just the threat of the creature, but what creating such a threat must mean for its creator, and his own ability to judge himself as a good man. Both are highly recommended reads. I cannot say this enough. Before I bought these current copies, I had read them in school. I had borrowed them from public libraries. They are worth reading. They are something you're going to read, and it may take a couple years, but you're going to get the itch to read them again. You're going to see them on your bookshelf, like my lovely bookshelf well, I got a couple different bookshelves right here, but my lovely bookshelves, and you're going to look at it and go, ooh, yeah, you know what, I got to give that book another read, because you will find more little details, more hidden beauties. Because that is what those authors capture so well. Mary Shelley perfectly delved into the psychology of somebody who is going through a moral and mental fall from grace, and who just when they thought there was a light at the end of the tunnel, realized all hope was lost. Because a crime is not undone simply because you feel guilt. Bram Stoker tapped into our most primal fears as civilized human beings about what is out there in the dark and what happens when it sets its sight on you and your loved ones. And because of that, these stories are endlessly adapted and will probably continue to be adapted for all of eternity. And that is why, whether it's this Halloween or next Halloween, when the mood strikes you, you want something that's going to creep you out, you want something that's going to sit in the back of your brain, and going to mess with your dreams, go OG. Go classic. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Go through them. Read them. Embrace the original stories as they were meant to be. But don't blame me if you're afraid to turn off the lights. Because you never know what's hiding in there.